Hello, everyone. I'm Gideon Fidelzeid, Managing Editor of PRWeek, and I'm so excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Global Comms 2021, The Right Impression. Thank you so much, Cision, for sponsoring today's event. For the 5th consecutive year, PRWeek and Cision have collaborated on the Global Comms Report, which annually surveys more than 500 PR professionals to continually gauge the evolution of comms' use of metrics, data, and analysis. Every year, we see notable shifts and some interesting consistencies. I will be sharing some of those findings with you today. But the key is the context, perspectives, and counsel that we brought to you by the 3 amazing guests who are joining me today, and I will introduce them shortly. But first, I quickly just wanted to run through some housekeeping items. So now is your chance to grab some water or a coffee and get comfortable. But if you're new here, listen up, and if you have any more questions, just give us a shout in the Q&A chat, and someone will help you out. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see orange widgets, which allow you to customize your viewing options. The main widgets on your screen are also movable, so feel free to adjust to your comfort level. We are recording today's session, and an on-demand version will be sent to you. If you're having any trouble seeing or hearing the presentation at any time, simply refresh your screen. We do want to hear from you and have this be as interactive a conversation as possible, so take advantage of that Q&A tool. I can see your questions, and we definitely want to get as many of them answered as we can. We've also shared some amazing resources with you, including the 2021 Global Comms Report. So don't forget to have a look around the resource section located on the bottom right corner of your screen. And our webinars are nothing without our audience feedback. Don't forget to take the survey at the end of today's presentation. But I think we have something for you right now. So you should see a poll on your screen. If you're ready to make the right impression with your comm strategy in 2022, simply click Yes, I'm Ready to chat with a Cision expert. Give you guys a couple seconds to do that. And there were 2 choices, so I'm sure you've all picked one of them. So hopefully you all picked yes, by the way. Now, it is my honor to introduce the 3 wonderful leaders that I referenced before who are joining me today. Emily Horn, Director of Corporate Comms at HP, Brent Diggins, Partner at MD at Allison & Partners, and Jay Webster, Chief Product Officer at Cision. Emily, Brent, Jay, thank you all so much for joining me today.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. To say this webcast will work is, the way this webcast will work, excuse me, is I'll be showing you some slides that share the data from the 2021 Global Comms Report. Some of it, clearly not all of it, because there's so much of it. In each case, once the data is revealed, I will bring our esteemed guests into the conversation to add context to what the data is telling us. Or perhaps better said, they will discuss the broader topics the data is focusing on in a manner that will elaborate and educate you all tactically. And I know how valuable that can be. Among the topics we'll discuss, PR's rise as a powerful C-suite voice, the increasing call for real-time data and analysis and how to answer that call, new and emerging tools and technology and how to take advantage of them, the growing focus on content and influencers to impact audience behavior, consumers, and other key stakeholders. We know how important that is. So it's about that time that we're getting to our audience. So it's about that time that we're getting to our slides. But first, as you see on your screen right now, I was talking about, this is the 5th year we've been doing our Global Comms Report, so I really kind of want to give you guys just a brief idea of what it's been all about. So, like I said, you could see the countries that we've surveyed, 7 all over the world, some of the biggest markets in the world. Always get 500 plus communicators and some marketing leaders as well, so it's a really, really good sample size. We get some really interesting changes year to year to see what trends are happening. We're going to get into some of those things. Obviously, we're going to be talking about budgets. We're going to be talking about social listening, a lot of different trends that are happening there. We always like to focus on the channels, platforms, and influencers that are impacting consumer behavior the most. Those things always take some interesting changes year on year, so we're going to be talking about that as well. And as I noted in the beginning, clear indication of and explanation for comms' rising role in the C-suite, which I know a lot of you have definitely heard about, well, and lived, of course, in the last couple of years. Ever since COVID, it does seem that C-suites are relying on communicators more than ever. We have some data to talk about that as well, so I'm really, really excited about that. But we're going to start with a couple of broader data points on the next slide, and we're going to get into the conversation this way. So, as I was just saying, 87% report that the C-suite has sought the counsel of comms more in the past year. That's a huge number. It's like that's like 6 out of 7, 7 out of 8. You know, if I was good at math, I'd be an accountant. So I'm not sure what 87% equals, but it's a lot. And then the next one is 91% say that not only do PR pros have to be strong communicators, they have to be strong data analysts. Data has become table stakes for what communicators do on a daily basis. This is kind of where I want to bring in our speakers now, because That 87% statistic, I mean, have you found that to be true in your dealings with your C-suites, or in Brent's case, the C-suites of his clients? And Emily, as the in-house leader, definitely want to start with you on that one.
Sure, I'm happy to address it. I think this is also could be an internal and external topic in the sense that internally, COVID rocked everybody, right? So to ease our employees, to make sure that we're addressing employees in an empathetic way. I think there's the internal component, and of course our employees are our best brand ambassadors on the outside of the company as well. But then the external piece, I would view we as communicators became even more important, because think about how businesses changed during COVID. I mean, speaking from a device maker where, at one point, no one really thought about their printers or their PCs that much, where, PCs were relevant, but over the last year or two, they've been essential, and there's sometimes 3 in the home. When businesses change that quickly externally on perception on their products and their people, I think it's just been the C-suite has been having to communicate in a very surgical way on the outside and the inside in ways that they haven't done before. So I think it's both an internal and external play.
Thank you very much for that. Brent, one of the other sort of offshoots of that statistic is whether or not clients are actually relying more on their PR agencies for counsel as well. Are you finding that to be the case over the last couple of years?
Absolutely. I think, the past couple of years have brought challenges that we've never seen. I've always been in an agency and have not seen our client base rely on the C-suite ask for PR counsel more than it did in the past 2 years for all the issues that emerged for digital transformation, the speed of product launches, and a lot for competitors. People want to know what their competitors are doing, some of that intelligence as well, and in addition to the day-to-day counsel of what we should do.
Excellent. And we just got a brief snippet of, comms' role in the C-suite has become more important, but the responsibilities that communicators have become exponentially greater than they were even 2 years ago. It's a great time to be a communicator, but you're working a lot more because there's a lot more on your plate right now, and that's a good thing, but it's a challenge. But Jay, on this slide, the one thing I want to focus with you on is the 91% statistic, because it's clear that our respondents, and I think this echoes the entire industry, realize if you're going to be a strong communicator today, you have to be a strong data analyst. As someone who works in that field, obviously, what do you think about this finding, and how do you see it manifesting itself among the communicators that you know?
So it's surprising and it's not. I mean, that is to say that if you really think about, especially from the Cision point of view, where we make enabling technologies, we're streaming in information from across the globe continuously, and that information is like mostly unstructured information. So when you think about the data science problem that's necessary to solve in order to be an effective communicator, to be able to be successful in your efforts to exert influence, it's actually amazingly complex. And I think that what you're seeing is that, in the combination of these two statistics, the societal changes kind of like accelerated in the age of COVID, make it a lot less likely for anyone in the C-suite to kind of wing it. That's why they want this advice and counsel. And on the other side of that, I think that, as all of the channels expand and the channels are democratized, that there's just so much more to kind of be careful of, to pick through, to understand, before you take a position on anything, quite frankly. And so I think that that's where that statistic is really being driven from, is that, it's on us in the technology, the enabling part of this business, to really deliver kind of deep insights, deep understanding of the environment, the audience, the context, to kind of help our clients, be better at their jobs.
Thank you for that. And I want to thank all three of you for already proving that I chose very wisely in my guests. Thank you for that. We get to prove that again on the next slide. A couple more broader thoughts from this survey. Like I told you, there was a lot of data that we got, and I really, really encourage all of you to check out the report. These are just some of the top findings. And you see all three of these on your screen right now. And they're all, we could probably spend an hour talking about each one of them. I don't want to obviously going to do that because we have a lot to get through today. But what I want to talk about also is let's look at that middle one about the 83%. I like big numbers, right? So 83% of respondents this year answered affirmatively when asked if comms can effectively measure and prove the impact of its work on business objectives. That's up from 76% 2 years ago. And by the way, just to explain, the reason I'm comparing it to 2019 is that was the last year we did this survey globally. Last year we only surveyed in the US, and that's important because if you read the report, you will see communicators in other parts of the world, there are different trends than what U.S. communicators answer. So those are all very interesting things to note, but this is a global number. So effectively measuring and proving the impact on business objectives. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what's going to impress the C-suite more than anything else. So Brent, I'm going to start with you on this one. And do you feel that communicators are more effective at proving the impact of their work on bottom line sales, things, needle moving statistics that the C-suite cares about?
Yeah, I think, this is interesting. I'm very encouraged to see it, of course. I think, there's a lot of things that factor here. And one is that the industry has become more data rich. We have gone from a very data poor industry historically to, I won't say the richest, but maybe we're middle class in terms of data. And there's emerging technology in Cision and so many others coming out with a lot of data. So that helps. I think the other part of it as an industry, I think we've also gotten better strategically so that functions within the comms unit are better able and have a more pragmatic, defined way of saying, hey, here's how we contribute to the business or whatever objectives we're trying to achieve. I think that has gotten a lot better, which probably leads to, combined with the data, this increasing number.
And Emily, as the in-house leader on this front, I obviously want to bring this to you now.
Yeah, well, and I think what's interesting, elephant in the room, of course, is just how virtual we've been in the last 2 years. And it's really funny to think about, I know you mentioned this at the top of the call, Gideon, about how, work-life balance is kind of shot given, that working from home and remotely and in this hybrid world, we don't have any off switches. What I think that's done, I think for all of us, is our executives have been able to say yes to more over the last 2 years. And so as communicators, being able to effectively measure and have the analysis at the ready of where to lend our voices and our executive voices is more important than ever because we're saying yes to more things. CEOs used to do, 4 events a year because of travel and their schedules and everything, and now you're seeing that go up 5 times. So I think the data and analysis, it's very interesting, and being data rich, I think, is a good thing because there's so many channels and opportunities out there for us, given this new hybrid way of life, that we need this data and analysis more than we ever have before.
Thank you for that. And Jay, as I did in the first slide, I think I want to focus on another data point with you on this one. It's the one on the right-hand side, the 28% one. 28% of the PR pros said very much when asked if they could identify the business impact of specific outlets where they received coverage. I mean, that's a very, very specific data point there about a specific article and knowing the impact that it had. It is up from 23% in 2019. It's not the highest number in the world, so clearly there's a lot of ways to go there. But as someone who works at Cision, one of the top companies obviously in this space, what do you think about that statistic, and do you feel that PR pros are actually starting to get a little bit stronger in identifying specific articles with specific impact?
Yeah, so it's an interesting statistic. It's nice that it's moved up by 5 points. I think though that so just kind of tying back to the previous comments is that we are all awash in data. It's really what we are able to make of all of the data that we are awash in that differentiates us, right? And so naturally, the ability and the desire to measure more accurately the results of the impact of our efforts is increasing. But I think there's a really interesting, it's an interesting point in time, and there's an interesting opportunity here to rotate CorpCom more to the center of corporate strategy, right? In all aspects. I mean, you think about how, kind of messaging and authenticity have become so important that it's natural that you would need to develop better capability to, measure your impact on a product launch, on a promotion, things that were previously the domain of paid media, I think now are very much the domain of earned media. If we still want to draw that line, right, between earned, paid, social, owned, it's all kind of getting mashed together. But I think that, I mean, look, I'm new to PR. I spent 20 years in ad tech, and I actually think it's like a very interesting, fascinating time right now to be in this profession. Because I do see the potential to rotate to the center of strategy for any company. So I'm getting nods from HP. That's awesome. Because it's not just like this is our corp comm person with an office next to the CEO. I think it's going to become central to the success of any corporation, any brand, any organization. Especially as we move at accelerated pace into, metaverse territory. So it's interesting that we can identify impact to a specific outlet. That's one interesting metric. I think it's become a smaller piece of the puzzle, though.
Well, thank you for that, Jay. And like I said, so it's always interesting to hear your perspectives, knowing that you come from the ad tech side, and now that you've come over to the PR comm side, it's always interesting to hear your perspectives on these things. So I'm going to take this opportunity as we move on to the next slide to remind everyone out there to please send in their questions. I will be sharing them with our esteemed panel towards the end of this conversation. Now we're going to get into the first two slides were a bit broader, getting a little bit more tactical and specific here with our survey. So if you look there right now, we have strong, accurate data about whether there was any digital or real-world behavior driven by our content. And again, communicators work so hard on their content to make some of the most creative stuff out there. And you want to make sure it's moving the needle. That's the most important thing. As great as it is, if it's not driving important business results, it's not really working. 60% strongly agree, 48% agree, 31 disagree, 5 strongly agree. The main point here is 46% of 2019 respondents either agreed or strongly agreed, compared to 64 this year. So communicators over the last 2 years are having a stronger and accurate sense of whether their data is, whether their content is, moving real world behavior. So again, I'll probably start with my before I get to Jay, I'm probably going to start with Brent and Emily. Emily, maybe I'll start with you here. Are you finding this to be the case with HP, where you are starting to get really better sense of how your content is working and how your content is driving real world behavior? Do you agree with the findings here? What are your thoughts?
Most definitely, and there's a lot of we have an entire function dedicated to brand journalism that is long gone are the days of the traditional newsroom. And basically creating long form features and content that hook into the trends that we're paying attention to, but not necessarily the products. It shouldn't be an HP commercial, of course. But that how this is, basically changing behaviors is something that we're seeing. So I would 100% agree with the uptick for sure.
And actually, Emily, I've known you for quite a while, and you're one of the smarter communicators around, and that's not to put any pressure on you. But
I swear I'm not paying Gideon to say that.
If you guys knew Emily, you would say the same thing, guys. Trust me. I know who I'm dealing with here. But seriously, Emily, the truth is that you just mentioned something about long form content, which for a while I think people were sort of thinking, that just doesn't work anymore. I mean, people's attention spans are 1 second long. Long form doesn't work, but I think people are starting to realize that maybe again it's because of the last 2 years and we're remote and we're on our computers more. Is long form content really driving a lot of things for HP right now? Maybe more than it was, say, 3-4 years ago.
Yes, and I would say also the application and addition of video. So giving the consumer the option to read something a little bit more long form, again, more time on our devices, but also incorporating video so that they can have a bite-sized version of it has really helped us too.
Excellent. The combination of the two is really where the sweet spot is. That makes total sense. Makes total sense. Thank you. Brent, with you, I'm actually going to focus on the bottom thing, on the bottom little note there about the 26% thing. 26% of this year's respondents prioritize the acquisition of real-time alerts for high-priority mentions as their key earned media goal. In 2019, 18% said so. Okay, real-time. Everyone knows this term. You hear it 20 times a day, probably more. what advancements in real-time data collection have you noticed? I might even say the last couple of years, for as long back as you want to go. Where do you feel PR is on this front? I'm not going to ask you whether it's where it needs to be, because I'm sure it can improve, but where do you see it right now in terms of its ability to not only get real-time data, but work with it the way it needs to work with it?
Yeah, I think, it's come a heck of a long way. Real time is, up for debate, but the speed, and Jay mentioned the speed is one of our driving currencies in business right now. And it is at a premium, like a Bitcoin, consistently going up and up and up and up. So, the speed, we see it almost every day. People want insights on what's happening in the marketplace, competitors, crisis is a big play for, real-time alerts, of course, but also opportunities in what we call cultural moments. Our consumer team lives at the intersection of culture and commerce, and for them, it's super important to see even a emerging trend, even an inkling of an emerging trend. Maybe it's one tweet, or maybe it's one post in a forum that spurs an idea that creates this monumental campaign. And we have a lot of examples of how we do that, but I see this more and more in real time, but also more frequently generally. So trend reports every couple weeks is something that a lot of our client base are tapping into, because they need to move more quickly just for the emerging market and the currency of speed and where we're all at competing in a business world.
Excellent. Jay, I'm going to ask you a real simple question. Just looking at the data that's on this page, what are your takeaways, obviously from Cision's perspective?
Awesome. So,
okay, 60%,
that was great. Well, simple answer, right? I mean, seeing this value of above 60% is pretty amazing. The sort of the views into real time is, I mean, you really have social media to thank for that. There's just so much signal out there that, much can be culled and learned on a near real-time basis from the right combination of social listening, really, and with the right application of machine learning models, you can start to see situations emerge before they actually arrive. If you're managing a reputation or a crisis moment, there are so many more data streams, out there that enable actual real-time monitoring is pretty amazing. But I would just say that that the fact that over 60% of the professionals in this survey think that they have great data in terms of how their efforts are impacting consumer behavior. That's just awesome.
I appreciate that. I also do want to note, playing somewhat of devil's advocate, 16% said strongly agree, 48% agree. And there's a reason we ask the questions that way as opposed to just yes or no, because there are degrees of agreement. So agree is great, but strongly agree is where everyone needs to be. I mean, that's where you got to get. So the improvement is obvious and it's great, but there's still a long way to go, which is, obviously music decisions years, I'm sure, because it'll keep it busy for a while. So, but anyway, the trends are really good, and that's the most important thing. We could move to the next slide, but I'm actually going to do something that I actually said I could consider doing. If we were getting some audience questions, and thank you all for that. And if I saw a really good one, I just kind of throw it in the middle, not have to wait to the end. So if you don't mind, I'm going to do that right now. So one of our listeners, and I'm going to read this pretty verbatim here, our organization is lacking on data, especially in the internal comms space. And as everyone knows, internal comms, employee comms has become such a huge part of what communicators are doing these days. So this reader says, our stories are coded for Google Analytics, but that's it. So what's the next step to help provide more robust data and show how our internal stories are helping move the numbers on engagement, DEI initiatives, et cetera? This is such an important question because, like I said, internal comms is so central to what communicators do now. So, Jay, maybe I'll start with you as the data guy here, sort of. You know what I mean? And I'll kind of turn it over to Emily.
Yeah, sort of.
What do you think about that one?
Sure. I was going to punch it straight to Emily because I figured
No.
No, dang it.
You can do that.
So, Yeah, I mean that's a really good and I'll admit like a really tough question. If you want, basically the way that I would think about it is to plan, structure your internal comms campaigns, if you will, the same way you would if you were launching them outside of the company, right? You understand what your goals are. So, for example, there's a mention of DEI initiative, right? So what are the measures that would indicate to you that you've made improvements, strides forward in your DEI programs, and make sure that you put measurements into place in order to be able to capture, that impact. That may be a kind of a more clever implementation of Google Analytics. I'm not sure that it's a limitation of the tool, or the design that you come up with may require you to do other things, like to sample your audience, right? To get anonymous feedback from people at fixed intervals after you've sent the message to see if the message is sinking in. And then then I assume like a program like DEI programs have got KPIs that they're trying to achieve, and you measure the impact on those things. Right? It'll take a little bit of creativity, but I don't think that the methodology is terribly disparate from the one that you would employ if you were communicating outside of the company. And Emily can tell me if I'm right or wrong there.
I'd say you're right. I mean, I think that interestingly enough, the internal communications function at HP is actually housed within the HR organization. So I'm more focused on the external communications elements. Sans, our executive team, we work on their internal comms. But I think you're right. I mean, I think you treat it just like you would external. I don't know that we do a wonderful job at that from an internal communication standpoint, from the data perspective. But I'm quickly listening to what you just said. I think that there are things that we should do to be better about, mining for, how are we moving the needle with our employees, and what are the tools? In fact, we're literally looking at tools right now to make it better. So I'd say there's work to do, and I would agree with you that there's no perfect, silver bullet for it. So I agree with you. If you mirror it to your external strategies and campaigns, I think that's better, certainly.
And Brent, any thoughts for our listener on her question about internal comms?
Yeah, I'd say, suggest looking into platforms. There's certainly platforms that specialize in this type of communication that provide analytics. Also, an employee experience survey. If you launch, a DE&I effort, how has that moved? So employee experience surveys, still a great method to gather feedback on any programming. One of the biggest things I see is trying to connect the data. Hey, you have an internal communications program about your new healthcare plan. Has that new healthcare plan been implemented or taken up more in choice? So connecting that data internally is sometimes a challenge as well. But if you can do that and define things right, I think you're in a much better way to start measuring these different things.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And thank you for indulging me as I went a little bit off script there by asking an audience question in the middle there, but I think it was worth it. So thank you for that. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. As you can see the slide on the screen right now. Recognizing the reader, and this is about the confidence in your tools and abilities to fully understand the profiles of the people who view your content on earned and owned channels. And again, you could find out fairly easily how many people might have looked in an article, but how well do you understand who those people are? That's really important. So you see a lot of numbers on here about both owned and earned, and the confidence level on the owned side seems to be a little bit higher than the confidence level on the earned side. I'm just generally going to ask, I know all of you guys saw this data already. I'm talking to the speakers, of course. I know you guys saw the data before. So, I mean, Brent, I'll start with you. In terms of recognizing and truly understanding the people who are reading the content, where are you and your clients right now?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? And you get these large general consumer, in some niches, right, it's pretty obvious. Like we know who reads Engineering Weekly. But when you move into, large consumer publications, what is that audience? Or even semi-niche publications, a fitness magazine or something like that. Is that professionals? Is it men, women? I think there's a lot of work to be done there. of defining the audience. Some of that, you can get from outside data sources. There's been some mergers and acquisitions that, hopefully make that easier. And probably Jay knows, from the ad tech world, this is much easier and usually more commonplace there versus communication. So I think, when technologies and mergers and acquisitions, continue to take place, I think we'll have a better answer there. But a lot of it, what we see is communicators and internal folks just defining who the audience is of a certain publication. And I'm speaking to the earned side right now. Owned is a little bit different, a little bit more clarity there with the audience. But the earned side, who reads X, Y, and Z publication. There's some art, but also, some subjectivity there still.
I would say the same. Sorry, Gideon, go ahead.
No. I'm not supposed to talk. Go ahead, Emily.
No, it's okay. I was just going to agree with that wholeheartedly because it's so hard. And if you look at this data, it's very middle of the road, right? And I think the owned tools, certainly we can understand our audience a lot better. But on the earned side, and especially just given, the different types of outlets and whether it's online and print and all the different things, I think that we have a long ways to go on understanding our audience in a better way. So it's something we're focused on. We want to understand that more. So it's something we've actually included in kind of our 2022 goals and objectives is to do some more audience learning.
No, and I appreciate that, and I'll obviously get to Jay in a second, but, I also do want to sort of put this all in context. I think the fact these are really deep data issues here that we're talking about, like this one on this slide right now. I think the fact that communicators can even have these conversations right now is a symbol of how far they've come. Yes, there's a long way to go with recognizing who your readers are, and listen, that's what companies like Cision help you with, and that's what great leaders like Emily and Ben work on all the time. But I think the fact that we couldn't even have this conversation 3 or 4 years ago in a webcast like this would have made absolutely no sense because communicators weren't there yet. At least now you're having that conversation.
So true.
I think that's the progress, and I think that's important. And if we do this again in 5 years, those numbers will be up, and hopefully Emily and Brent and Jay will be able to talk about it. But for now, in 2021, Jay, what does this slide tell you?
Well, we could spend an entire hour just on this slide.
Yeah.
There's actually a complex and convoluted series of events that are coming together to make this increasingly difficult. So you have a patchwork of consumer privacy legislation. In the United States, it's not a federal mandate, so potentially you could end up with 50 different pieces of legislation that we have to accommodate, publishers have to accommodate. And then with the deprecation of the third-party cookie and the competing, UID solutions out there, publishers are really starting to lock down. Right. And so, the ability to place a tracking pixel and the potential liability that comes along with that as the legal environment continues to evolve, publishers just aren't interested in taking on, that kind of liability. And so more and more we're having to apply modeling to audience data to try and characterize who it is that you're communicating with. But I think that like everything, this will end up being kind of a sine wave, sort of Superman versus Lex Luthor, where, every time there's a new piece of legislation or one model dies out, the endless kind of appetite for innovation will come up with a new solve, right? And so, there's a company now called Memo that's, developing a financial model that basically, incentivizes publishers to be able to provide this information in a more complete way, in a compliant way. But as publishers struggle to be able to hang on to their revenue model, anything that, that cuts the publisher into the equation in terms of the revenue stream is a good thing, right? And so I think that, there will be more and more innovation along this line, but that's really all I'm trying to say is that this is a very challenging problem, and it's not going to get any easier anytime soon, right? So we have significant efforts against this in 22. I'm sure that every software maker in our category has efforts, that are similar. So It's challenging.
It is challenging. And, look, let's be honest. I mean, as great, Emily and Brent and Jay are three of the great leaders in this industry, but even they don't have all the solutions. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just important, though, that what we're really giving you guys a lot is some food for thought. That's where the survey is going to come in. It's really going to make you think about some things that you haven't before. You can't come up with solution stuff if you don't really recognize what the problems are. So I think that's where this is so important, too. We can move on to the next slide now. And by the way, keep those audience questions coming. Guys, we got some good ones for you in here. Got some younger listeners out there with some really interesting questions. And I know how much you guys like helping the next generation of professionals. So I think some of those questions are going to be really interesting. Social listening. Okay, this is something I really was excited to talk about because clearly this is a tool that is becoming more prominent among communicators for obvious reasons. Now, the data you have here, I will admit, probably focuses more on how much professionals in each of these countries are relying on social listening. And so, but I want to talk this from a tactical level. I mean, very, very simply, I would imagine most of the people out there realize that social listening is an important tool. It's really going to, and it's an important real-time tool as well, of course. So you can see the numbers on your screen, but I'm going to talk tactically with the guys. And Brett, I think I'm going to start with you. Just broadly speaking, how much is the importance of social listening increased in the work that you are doing with your clients, as well as the work that the clients are doing for themselves?
Yeah, it's been astounding, and a lot, obviously, thanks to the technology advancements that have allowed us to do this. And there's a lot of factors at play, like Jay was talking about. Still a lot of privacy issues to get a full suite of data. Recently, I'm actually a little bit less bullish on just social listening in and of itself due to the privacy and that people show up different in different places, right? An issue may show up different on Twitter than it does in news media, than it does on search. So I think having social listening as a basis to look at emerging trends, what's happening is fantastic, but really believe, you should take a more holistic look what's being said in news, what's being said among your customer base through a survey, what's happening in search, and you get a better, well-rounded look at what's happening. But social listening generally is a great look and a tap into what's happening culturally in the conversation in general. I just caveat, like we were talking about earlier with audience, the audience from Facebook is a lot different than Twitter across the channels. So think about social listening. While powerful, I think it's time we start thinking about it more strategically and with some context as well, and with some caution.
Fantastic advice. Jay, I guess I'll turn it over to you now.
Yeah, so obviously, very central to our strategy, we acquired BrandWatch, earlier this year, rated the #1 listening company by Gartner. But I think that social listening is the tip of the spear, as it were. It's where you tend to be able to detect signal first. And so, kind of pursuant to my comments on real-time data, I think that the social channels in combination are the best medium for that. They certainly don't, as Brent said, represent the entire audience. And you do have to account for the demographic that populates these various channels. People do show up differently. I think that's well said in different places. But the other thing I would say is that, our attraction to BrandWatch, for example, was really, again, we all have access to all of this data, right? You can write the check and for Twitter Firehose, and you can have access to the data. But what we found is that, you can really, with the application of sophisticated models and data science, uncover very sophisticated trends, through the use of kind of a broad swath of social media data, right? So like the BrandWatch product is really focused on consumer trends and being able to predict the evolving consumer trends in response to macro events, micro events in the economy. It's not kind of a literal interpretation of social media, kind of tweet by tweet. it's a massive kind of flood of data that I think with the appropriate level of sophistication, you really can glean amazing insight from such a, from a corpus of data that's that large and that fast moving, quite frankly. So it's super important, I think, for everyone in our business to embrace this tool and this channel. I think how you do will vary depending on, where you sit in the function.
And
Emily,
Gideon, I can add, yeah, sure. I can add just a couple comments here on this, because given, being a consumer brand, one that, we operate in 170 countries, we take this extremely seriously from a customer service and support perspective. Also, crisis comms. There's a multitude of issues that can come up around the world, and so we're able to really understand because sometimes whether it's groups and human rights issues, or we have a very complex supply chain and have a huge focus on human rights and overall sustainable impact is what we call it within the company. But what we're seeing is consumers are taking to social media to elevate issues, to raise their issues with their products, et cetera. So we find this extremely important. And what will be interesting is getting into the next set of data. I think it's coming up is the channel is truly important, and who uses each channel is a totally different audience, and then that gets you into how you respond and the way you respond. So listening is one thing, responding is the other, but this is a huge tool for us.
And a wonderful segue to move on to the next slide. So thank you, Emily. Now, people of persuasion, this is basically influencers. And this is we ask this question every single year. And I love this because you notice changes all the time, and it's really interesting. So as part of facilitating consumer behavior is understanding who has the most influence over how they think about products and ultimately decide to spend their money. So here we're indicating who our global respondents need to be the most persuasive influencers. And you can see it on the screen right there. Everyday consumers, people like me, they're at the top. That hasn't always been the case. And what I'm going to say is this: there's one point I want to make, and there's one point I want to focus on with our esteemed panels here. Celebrities. When we first did this survey back in 2017, they were at the top, and now you see where they are. And I think that is a huge statement. I'm not sitting here telling brands that working with celebrities cannot be effective. Of course it can, but it is not the one-size-fits-all solution that it was a few years ago. Right now, people want to hear from people like them. And anyone who's heard a webcast with me before has always heard me make this example. It's the God's honest truth. There is this online group. I live in Plainview, Long Island. It's called Plainview Moms. I am not a mother, clearly. But I listen to these people. When they recommend something, I listen to it. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, they're right. And those are people like me, sort of. And that's a lot of people are saying there's people like that all the time. So that's really important. I want to kind of make that point in terms of the way this is trending. But one of the interesting things, this is what I want to talk to you guys about, is look where employees are. They're third, okay? That was definitely not the case a few years ago. Employees have a major role to play with your brand externally as well. And people on the outside of the companies really want to hear from the employees of the company as well. So it's an interesting finding. And Emily, I might want to start with you in this one. Do you find that that's the case where, the whole point of employees being brand ambassadors has been elevated because people on the outside really care what employees think about the brand?
Absolutely. I think my boss, Karen Kahn, said it best when she said, your employees are confetti for your brand. They are out there to kind of convey their pride in the brand. And I think that what has happened in the last 20 months and a global pandemic and the way that people are feeling, I think we just can't, diminish the fact that people are making buying and purchasing decisions based on trust in brands and how they act as corporate citizens, and how, the celebrities thing, or just a quick comment on that. I think that, not only did we enter a global pandemic, but there was a ton of social unrest that was going on at the same time. And I'd argue it remains and will remain for some time. And I think that celebrities can be a bit polarizing depending on where they're where they're lending their voice. So I thought this was really interesting that celebrities kind of, dropped. And I think that the employee piece rising has to do with pride and how people talk about their job, how they were taken care of during the pandemic, how, their company, prioritized their health and well-being. And I think when people hear employees say that about their brand, they believe them. It's a more, kind of a more authentic and, it's a more authentic belief. I think if an employee is talking about their brand and they believe in it, then you believe in it.
Absolutely. And Brian, what are your thoughts on that? Brent, sorry. Brent, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, employees of all organizations have gone through a lot. If they're out there championing the brand, being that confetti, that says a lot. And people are really looking at how organizations are treating their employees. So if they're out there with a positive message, they feel good about an organization, that lends itself to, transferring that feel good to consumers or end audiences as well. And celebrities, I think, same thing we're talking about the past couple of slides as audience. I'll maybe look at a celebrity or think they have credence in something, but certainly if I'm getting a hip replacement, I may not look at celebrities as having a lot of influence there. So I think celebrities, authenticity, like Emily said, and do they have expertise there? I see that people, seeing through celebrities a little bit more and where their expertise and authenticity may lie.
And Jay, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about this as well.
Brent, I'm a hip replacement influencer on Google. I got 1,000 views of my review. Anyway, so
although I know that,
here's my take on this. Look, every person on this planet is an influencer, and the strength of your influence depends on the topic. It depends on the sphere of people that you're talking to, your connection to them. Everyone is an influencer. Look at how the environment is changing for journalists, right? So journalists have largely been failed by their outlets in terms of, career and job security. They're rolled up by private equity and they're the first things to be cut. So you've got Substack and you've got Medium and all of these platforms where journalists are deciding, like, I'm going to go build my own brand, my own following, my own audience. Maybe I'll write for Vanity Fair on occasion, but I'm taking control of my own situation, right? That I want to connect with people that are interested in what I have to say in my voice, right? And so this everyday consumer rising to the top is super cool, and it kind of cracks me up because my first job in online media, I'm going to date myself, 1996, was at a company that had this practice called audience development, where we're basically just, trying to connect with and build a raving fan base for what it is that you do, your brand, your product, right? And so I ran across this amazing startup company called Statosphere. And Statosphere is just like, they're a rocket, the way that they're growing, and they're basically doing that, right? That they've embraced the everyday consumer and created a really interesting kind of non-monetary incentive system to get people to participate. But it really is, it just captures, how important authenticity is, right? Brands have to be authentic. That's why it's like, celebrity's not a celebrity. Like Ryan Reynolds, seems a little more authentic in his communication than maybe Kylie Jenner these days, right? And so employees are super important because it is how were they taken care of during the pandemic? Like, what are the strength of their DEI initiatives, right? Like, how are they actually living those out? And then you just move down the line to everyday consumer. If you can get someone through your efforts to say something supportive of whatever your initiative is, that's just an unpaid fan of your brand, well, then you've really hit it out of the park. I love this slide. I think this is awesome. I think this is the way things are going, and I'm going to try and be, in line with this as I push our company forward.
Appreciate that, Jay. And actually, one of our listeners was asking about this. Is basically essentially word of mouth, and in a way it is. Except obviously the word of mouth has been amplified because it isn't just word of mouth; it's on social and it's on all these other channels. So the megaphone that everyday consumers have is huge now, and obviously that's a bigger part of this as well. If we can move on to the next slide. Can't believe we only have 10 minutes left. Oh boy. Platforms of persuasion. Yes. Okay. So we drilled deep into the types of influence that have the most impact on consumer behavior. Here we focus on 8 different types of content to ascertain which is the most similar influence on consumers around the world. And, it's funny. Online feature is number 1. And I would have been surprised by that. Maybe I'm still a little bit surprised by that, but don't forget what Emily said before about long form. I mean, people actually, now that they have time, and again, maybe it's not surprising that given the last couple of years, this actually has proven, to be very, very popular. But, one of the things I actually want to talk about is the brand website part, because, I think that so many companies think about social channels so much and making sure that their content is, just right on all those social channels. Their own brand website, which is really the one thing that they control more than anything else, sometimes gets neglected. But it is where people go to get information for a company before almost anything else, right? So, Emily, I know HP has a wonderful website. So, in terms of the brand website, do you feel that the comms team and the company really, really devotes the time that it needs to make sure that if people need information on your company, they can go to your website and they can get what they need?
Definitely. And the other thing that we do too is try to, if there are a good example, we announced some DEI and sustainable impact focus ads for the Olympics, and one was around ocean-bound plastics and how we use ocean-bound plastics in our products. And what we made sure is that when we have these beautifully produced ads, that it's reflected all the way across our channels. So we do a lot of banner work on HP.com. I mean, obviously it's a consumer website where people go to buy products, but we also make sure to prioritize the company's values just as much as I'm looking for a product. Just what I've said before about people truly caring about what decisions companies are making and that informing their buying decisions. We're trying to meld the two, right? Making sure that we have our company values just as highlighted and featured as the products themselves, because we think that will increase trust in our brand and therefore buying products. So it's something that we do focus on a ton. Absolutely.
No, I really appreciate that. That also kind of gets into the conversation, which is not necessarily the conversation we're having today, about the difference between your corporate brand and just your plain old brand, which really relates to your products. It is different, and people really care about that corporate brand more than they ever have before. But anyway, I digress. So Brent, I mean, as far as brand websites are concerned, again, I'm sure you work with your clients to make sure that they kind of take care of their own house, as it were, make sure that's strong before they start worrying about all the social channels and all the other channels that they're working on.
Yeah, I'm just amazed about the power of brand and what brand means and what brand DNA now is. 5, 7, 10 years ago, trusting a brand was not anywhere near where it is. Essentially, there's 4 things on this slide, the website, the video, the post, and the blog post that are all brand-centric. 10 years ago, people had a much more general mistrust of brands. So strengthening the brand, it's just encouraging to see. And, those brands that are doing it well are really accelerating, as we all know. So just the power of brands is just astounding to see how that has changed in quite a short period of time.
Absolutely. And, in the interest of moving along, Jay, I'm going to start with you, but we're going to go on the next slide right now.
Sure.
Because, again, 60 minutes is just not enough time for these. We got to make these webcasts longer, fellas, but that's another story. Channel choices. Sorry about that. People can only take Gideon people can only take Gideon for 60 minutes. That's the maximum. We have data to prove this, so that's why we're doing this in 60 minutes. When brands decide which platforms to prioritize with their content, the same ones still rule the roost. This year's data, though, reveals a shift among some of the top channels. And, you see where they are. Facebook being at the top doesn't change. That doesn't surprise anyone. Instagram, which is also part of Facebook, at top 2. But you know what? LinkedIn, over the last few years, and this did precede COVID, by the way, has really, really become – it is no longer just that Rolodex where you could find where people work anymore. It is a bona fide channel where people converse and people share ideas and all those kinds of things. And I kind of want to talk to all of you about LinkedIn and where that comes in the brand building process. And Brent, I guess I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think from an employee experience, it's super important, but it depends on, what your organization is. Does it play in LinkedIn? Is the audience there? who are you using it? I think for any channel, my biggest thing when looking at them, either from an analytics or strategy standpoint, is what's the job? What's the job of the channel? For LinkedIn, is it employees? Is it recruiting? Is it all of these things? But have seen LinkedIn grow for those specific business-related things and also for expertise. That's something that we get asked every day. I'm sure Jay does too, about LinkedIn data and what's happening there and what's going on there. So people are very interested, and it's definitely moving the needle in the business world.
Excellent. And Emily?
It's an interesting one. I think when we have executives ask where they should be lending their voice from a social media perspective, we tend to go directly to LinkedIn. And I absolutely, we see value all the way across the platforms. What's really interesting, though, of course, is, Facebook is at the top. And there's also just that really interesting component of some of the reputational, issues that Facebook has faced and challenges. Yet we're using it. It's got the highest score here, right? But from an executive thought leadership perspective, we tend to point and start our executives on LinkedIn because it is a really influential place. We find that the people engaging with content on LinkedIn tend to be a more balanced and business-focused audience versus, and I love Twitter as well, but that's a little bit more wild west from a consumer standpoint. So we tend to focus on LinkedIn first before we potentially cannibalize with multiple channels and that's specific to executives, but we think that LinkedIn is key for our exec team.
Excellent. And Jay, close with you on this one.
Okay. I love this one. So I'm just going to go out on a limb here and predict that Facebook will not be number one at the end of the year next year. It's going to be the one that's not on this chart, TikTok. It's interesting. I think so. They haven't really paid for it yet, but come on. Eventually, Facebook is going to pay for all of the issues that they've had. All of the issues that continue to surface. There's a cosmetics company called Lush that's European-based that actually ran a campaign while I was just there last week that they have shut down all of their social media accounts because they feel that it's social media is overall toxic for society. And so it'll be interesting to see, because they're a big brand. They were a big presence on social media. It'll be interesting to see if that becomes a movement. LinkedIn, I have mixed feelings about it. I totally understand and appreciate, what Emily is saying. It's especially for the audience that HP is after. It makes sense. But what I have found is that, the level of discourse on LinkedIn is in decline. LinkedIn used to be the place where it was there was professional decorum. You kind of separated your personal social media activity from LinkedIn, and now the discourse on LinkedIn as other channels have become more aggressive in regulating it has really, really declined. There are people who will comment on things on LinkedIn in a way that I just wouldn't have imagined 2 years ago that you'd want to be associated with your brand or your company. And it's just like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? So I think the channel choices, there's going to be, a reshuffle of these again, I think in the coming year. And I predict that you will see the TikTok is going to own that orange circle by the end of next year.
You know what? It'll be interesting because TikTok, you didn't see it on the slide, but you will see it when you download the ebook, when you download the report. TikTok was one of the options we gave. Didn't score as high. It scored higher, obviously, the markets outside the U.S. Okay, so Jay Webster called it. So and Emily's agreeing. Brent's not saying anything. He wants to play it safe. I get it. But so anyway, guys. Okay, you know what? I can't believe we're coming up against the hour here. But before we go anywhere else, I actually do want to run another poll, which is the same poll we ran actually in the start of the thing. And the reason I kind of think this is important is because a few people had comments coming in about questions about getting in touch with Cision about a few things. Some people have just signed on for Cision and have a few questions. So if you want to talk to Cision, this is clearly one way to do it. But again, you can always reach out to the folks at Cision. You can go to their website. There's There's millions of places where you can contact them. So if you have any questions about using Cision, they're one of the friendliest companies out there. So by all means, do so. I mean, obviously, you can see the question up there. And if you're ready to talk to Cision, just click yes, I'm ready, and they will get in touch with you. And as I was saying that, we hit 3 o'clock, which I know is noon for a couple of you guys on this call. So the time just flies when we do these things. That was so much fun. And, I really always enjoy, we do this particular webcast every year because we have the report every year. And, it's always so gratifying because, Cision and PRWeek work really, really hard on putting this report together. I know there's a couple of people out there who also commented that they wish there were a couple of other markets that we surveyed in. We'll definitely look into that as well, for sure, going forward. But for now, on behalf of PRWeek, as well as our audience, I sincerely thank Cision for sponsoring today's event. And, of course, much gratitude to Emily, Brent, and Jay for taking time from their very busy schedules to join us today and share their vast expertise. I also want to thank all of you, our audience. I truly appreciate your attendance and participation today. Hope you got as much out of this webcast as you were hoping, if not more. And thank you for all those questions as well. An on-demand version of today's webcast will be sent to all of you very, very soon. And don't forget the resource section at the bottom right of your screen. I highly encourage you to look around there for some great additional materials from Cision, including the Global Comms report upon which this entire webcast is based. For now, on behalf of Cision and PRWeek, thank you for attending this webcast, Global Comms 2021, The Right Impression. Until next time, this is Gideon Fidelzeid wishing you all the best. Stay safe and healthy. Take care of yourselves and each other. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.